Welcome to On Our Watch, a podcast about coastal erosion and sustainability in Louisiana, as well as the implications for coastal systems worldwide. My name is Marian Evans. I'm a filmmaker and a producer of the documentary On Our Watch, a feature-length film about Louisiana's coastal land loss crisis. The film's director, Jonathan Evans, and I are proud to produce this podcast series that will continue to explore important coastal issues through conversations with local residents, community leaders, and experts. In this episode, we're speaking with Julie Lively. Julie is the Executive Director of Louisiana Sea Grant, an extension of the National Sea Grant College program located at LSU in Baton Rouge that works to promote stewardship of the state's coastal resources through a combination of research, education, and outreach. And now, our interview with Julie Lively. Well, thank you, Julie, for joining us today. So I wanted to start by asking you about how you got into this field of coastal research and education.
Sure. So I'm actually originally from Illinois, from a very landlocked area, but I always loved the marine sciences, and I've fully meandered south. I went to Missouri for my undergrad, went out to the University of Delaware for a PhD, and there I started working with fisheries and with some projects that involved commercial fishing. And so when I finished looking for jobs everywhere, but I had a friend who was actually at UNO and sent me the job ad that I always liked doing outreach projects. I always liked when we had student groups come to the university, being able to take them out sailing, showing them the ocean. And so they were looking for a combination of researcher and extension. I'd never been to Louisiana till I interviewed for the job, and I found myself moving to Baton Rouge.
Wow, very cool. And so how did you become interested in fisheries in that subject?
So in grad school, I was working on a project that was trying to find a new bait in the eel and whelk fishery. Horseshoe crab was often used, and they were starting to be worried about the populations. So I was going out with eel and whelk fishermen. In Delaware, there were only a handful of commercial fishermen, and they did everything. Pretty much every single season they switched from one species to the next. So that was one of the things I thought was really cool about Louisiana, was that there were lots of commercial fishermen and a lot of different fisheries. And that people were still really, there were active fishing communities, whereas a lot of the areas in the mid-Atlantic and New England, those had really started to vanish over the years.
Okay. And so for people who may not be familiar, can you give us a bit of an overview of what Louisiana Sea Grant is and what its primary purpose is?
Sure. So Sea Grant is a state-federal partnership. So National Sea Grant falls under NOAA, and we are one of 34 programs. So almost all the Great Lakes and coastal states and Guam have a Sea Grant program. And so we receive federal funding, and we have to have that state match. Many of us, each program is set up a little bit differently. Most of us are housed at a university. And so Louisiana Sea Grant is housed here at Louisiana State University in Baton Rouge. But each program is a little bit different. And basically I say it's the cooperative extension model that many people know from farming that started. And so it was really helped to get science for the coastal communities into those communities. So we have three major areas that we focus on. We have extension, education, and research. And so we try to do research that's important, get that research out, and also help educate the communities as well.
Okay. And extension is like getting out into the communities. That's what that means?
Yes, extension or outreach. So we have extension agents. We're paired with LSU Ag Center. So many of us are dual employees through both. And it's getting those research results out to the communities, as well as, trying to find help, explaining, when regulations change, getting that information out to the communities, and also getting those concerns from the communities back to the decision makers.
Right. And so as the executive director for Louisiana Sea Grant, what are some of the main initiatives that you're focused on?
Sure. So I was the fishery specialist for 11, 12 years. So fishing is always kind of a little bit, my focus area. But we focus on anything that's resilient communities, healthy coastal ecosystems, fisheries and aquaculture, and education and workforce development. So here in Louisiana, there's just a lot of coastal issues, as I'm sure you've covered in many of your programs. And so it's really trying to just help the residents, the communities, and those industries get the information they need. So here focusing a lot on resilience. So how to better prepare for storms, how to better rebuild after storms, how to get businesses back up and running, or, work with the state to get the emergency resources out to get businesses reopened, get fishing going again. And focusing on research that also helps with those things, teaching the kids, so that it's amazing, even, kids in Baton Rouge, New Orleans, that have never gone to the coast. And so trying to get them to actually appreciate the unique landscape that is Louisiana.
Right. Sometimes you're not even aware, you're so close to the water. Yeah.
Or they assume it's the sandy beach that is the rest of the Gulf Coast.
Right. So as you mentioned, there's so many coastal projects and coastal topics. What are the challenges to prioritizing and managing all the different projects that Louisiana Sea Grant has going on? And how do you kind of decide what direction to take things in?
Sure. So some of it, and one of the reasons I was interested in becoming director after being one of our specialists, was the amazing team we have. So we have about 40 full-time employees. And again, some of those are technically Ag Center as opposed to Sea Grant under LSU. But so we have our agents that are kind of housed in the parishes that often are dealing with, they're the front lines. They're getting the day-to-day questions, interactions, really what's going on. We have our education team that, oversees all the things they're doing with education and the many programming. We have our research unit that they oversee. We hand out a lot of research awards. So some of the funding we get from Congress, we are federally mandated to do applied research with it. So they manage those funding calls, they manage how that money goes out the door. And then our extension team, we have our specialists on campus. So a lot of it is, just getting all of those units working together. Our law and policy program in Louisiana, I tell everyone, I don't know how you do coastal work without legal expertise. So we actually have lawyers who are on staff that they don't practice active law or go to court, but they basically advise on the law and policy that affects the coast.
Okay. And so, as you mentioned, you have a strong background in commercial fisheries research and marine biology. So how does that kind of inform your leadership as executive director and the work that Louisiana Sea Grant does?
Sure. So my background is actually kind of in the blue crab fishery here. That's blue crab research was a lot of what I was doing as a state specialist. And so I think a lot of it is having gotten a chance to really be out in the communities a lot. Even when I was faculty on campus, I was often doing outreach and extension events with the communities, with fishermen. And so seeing firsthand how a policy made in DC or here in Baton Rouge may seem great on paper, but then seeing out, talking firsthand to the residents, why that just isn't practical or why it may not make sense. So I think trying to get, for me, it's important to get all the voices in the room. So I mentioned all of our different units. We regularly have unit lead meetings where everyone comes together and discusses what they're seeing to try and help have kind of the whole team contribute.
Right. And so you were talking about the LSU Ag Center, which I know you're also an associate professor with the LSU Ag Center. So can you tell me more about how they work with Louisiana Sea Grant and how those two organizations kind of complement each other?
Sure. So it goes back to the 70s, I believe, that LSU Ag Center became a separate entity technically than Louisiana State University. But essentially we're housed on the same campus for the most part. So anyone with an extension appointment at kind of in the LSU system is housed within LSU Ag Center. So all of our agents who are out in the different Ag Center offices, and so they're housed, yes, in Ag Center offices, usually in the parishes. And then here on campus, all of the faculty, which we consider our specialists, fisheries economics, fisheries, aquaculture, are all housed within a College of Ag department. And so really it's just a match. So essentially almost all of them are 50-50 in salary. So we're able, and so for us, that's partly how, even though we're not, in the grand scheme of Sea Grant, we don't have, really, really high levels of funding. We're kind of in the middle. We're able to have a pretty large program because we can leverage those partnerships. So funding is contributing from the federal system, from the state system on LSU side, and then also from LSU Ag Center.
Okay. Seems like a really good pairing.
Yeah.
So what are some of the biggest lessons that you've learned over the course of your career?
I think for me, a lot of it is, again, kind of having the voices in the room. recognizing that, what may make perfect sense, when you really see the whole picture. So, for example, I often warn grad students, if they go out in the field and are trying to analyze a site, if they have no idea what happened there a few weeks before, they may be looking at what species. Well, if a group was out there collecting a certain type of shell the week before, they're going to find none of it. But they may just go, oh, this doesn't exist here. They have no idea that it was all collected right before that. And there's been so many changes across coastal Louisiana. So, trying to look at the back history, look at what's happening in issue. When it comes to fisheries, looking at changing regulations, my students will often come with, oh, we found, things really shifted right here when we look at the data. And it's like, well, there was a large fishery management change. The population may not have shifted, but they're now not catching the smaller animals, or you're seeing this shift and it doesn't necessarily relate to the population, it relates to the management decision. So being able to kind of see that larger picture and connect all those other pieces that may go beyond just the science or the whatever small issue you're looking at.
Right. And so what are some of the upcoming projects that you're most excited about right now with Louisiana Sea Grant?
Sure. So one of the things I was able to do before I became director was participate. LSU Ag Center holds a ag leadership program, which I was really interested. They take only 2 people internally from the Ag Center, and the rest are from the larger ag community. Where I grew up, it was more of a farming town in Illinois. So I knew a lot about corn and soybeans. I knew nothing about any other ag. Moving to Louisiana, we have a lot of other unique agriculture products. So I was excited to learn more about traditional ag in Louisiana. But it was a great program, and in talking to their director, often we don't see many fishing, seafood people in it. Over the years, the fishing industries have suffered from graying of the fleet, just an aging industry, people having to move away from the coast. And so we've lost a lot of the big leaders in the industry over the years, and trying to get new people to step up and recognize that they now are the leader that needs to have their voices heard. So we started a smaller program that kicked off last fall. Tomorrow is actually our last session of this first group. And it's been great getting the industries together. So again, many of our sectors don't necessarily talk across the different commodities. They're talking to each other. They're talking about the common issues that they're all facing and what they can try to do for the industry. And so it's been great to see them connecting the dots, making connections with legislators, things like that, and what they can do to help.
Yeah, very cool. And do you see this as like an interesting time in coastal world in Louisiana, and kind of what are the opportunities that you see right now?
It is. I guess in a way it's an opportunity, but we've already talked about, especially last year after the droughts. I've now been here 14, 15 years. And when I got here, we were talking about what climate change might look like in coastal Louisiana. That was often a question I got all the time. And we talked about it being hotter, maybe drier, just these different, increased storms. Because I moved here about 5 years after Katrina, and people talked about, it's like, well, some things still aren't cleaned up. Well, now having witnessed several major hurricanes, recognizing that 5 years is nothing for true recovery. And now it's like we're actually seeing those changes in climate. We're seeing the increased heavy rains that come across Louisiana. And we just, we've all talked about that we didn't really expect to be living it yet. So it's trying to see, okay, we talked about things that we could try to do. So what can we implement? What can be done? And just trying to help make it so that, coastal Louisiana still has good, vibrant, resilient communities.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Julie, for talking to me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to On Our Watch. We hope you enjoyed our discussion with Julie Lively. Don't forget to subscribe to On Our Watch on your favorite podcast app to be notified about future episodes. You can find our feature-length documentary On Our Watch, as well as a video version of today's episode, in the links below. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll be back with another episode next week. This podcast is made possible through support from the Greater New Orleans Foundation and executive produced by Bruno UK Steiner.